Unaware of his wife's $300 million inheritance, Daniel slammed the door of their family house, locking out the woman who built it brick by brick beside him. But not for nothing. He did it to marry her best friend, the same woman who used to toast their anniversaries and whisper, "You two are perfect together." To the world, Daniel looked victorious, a man trading failure for fortune. But beneath that smug smile hid a cruel miscalculation, because the poor wife he discarded wasn't just betrayed. She was becoming the most powerful woman he'd ever fear. Now whispers are spreading about what she did when she heard, and why Daniel hasn't been seen smiling since. But what did she do when the truth reached her? Why did her best friend suddenly vanish from their new home? And how did the locked-out wife turn one night of humiliation into the beginning of Daniel's ruin? Snow was falling like ash from a cold heaven the night Evelyn pounded on the mansion door she once called home. Her palms stung with frost, her breath came in shards, and the wind tore through her thin sweater as if the storm itself wanted her erased. Through the frost-glazed window, Daniel stood beside the fireplace, a drink in hand, his laughter glowing warm in the golden light. His parents were there too, pearls and cigars gleaming, eyes sparkling with satisfaction. And beside him, clothed in Evelyn's old silk robe, was Claire, her best friend. Evelyn's voice broke against the wood. "Daniel, please, let me in." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. Locked. Again. Through the glass, Daniel's smirk widened. He raised his glass in mock salute before turning away. His father's laughter followed, deep and cruel, echoing through the storm. Evelyn stumbled back, watching their silhouettes blur in the frost. A part of her wanted to believe this wasn't real, that it was one of his cruel tests, another manipulation she'd somehow fail. But as the cold bit into her bones, she finally understood. They didn't just reject her. They wanted her erased. The snow gathered at her feet, swallowing her cries. And as she collapsed into the white silence, memories bled through her. The diner where it all began, the clang of plates, the scent of burnt coffee, and the man who'd walked in wearing power like a tailored coat. Daniel had been charming then, his smile the kind that promised rescue. She'd been 24, hopeful, broke, and invisible. He tipped more than her weekly pay, asked about her dreams, and told her she deserved better than grease and late shifts. Back then, he was a rising executive with family money and ambition that looked like magic to a girl who'd grown up counting coins for rent. He took her to places she never dreamed of, dressed her in silk, kissed her hand like she was royalty. When he proposed under the city lights, she thought she'd been chosen by fate. But fate, it turned out, had sharp teeth. In the early years, he'd whisper, "I built this life for us." But slowly those words twisted. "I built this life for you, so you owe me." Her world shrank. He replaced her friends with his associates, her choices with his preferences. Every suggestion became a rule. Every disagreement became proof she was ungrateful. He isolated her under the guise of protection. And when she began noticing how often Claire, her best friend, appeared uninvited, how Daniel's mother praised Claire's refinement, she convinced herself she was overthinking. Daniel said so too, smiling like he pitied her. "You're imagining things again," he'd murmur, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You always make drama from nothing." The gaslighting came gently, like fog seeping under a door, soft, invisible, suffocating. At dinners, his parents mocked her background, disguised as jokes. When she tried to speak, Daniel would touch her hand and whisper, "They mean well." But it was Claire's laugh that cut the deepest, the soft, knowing laugh that said, "You don't belong here anymore." Months before the snow, Evelyn found the photos. Daniel and Claire in the beach house she'd decorated herself. The same robe, the same smile he once gave her. When she confronted him, he turned it on her, claiming she was paranoid, unstable, hysterical. Within days, her credit cards were frozen, her name vanished from the joint accounts, and a lawyer arrived with documents she'd never signed. Her parents, who adored Daniel's wealth, urged her to be patient. Her father said, "You should be grateful he still wants to talk to you." Then came the humiliation. Her car, repossessed, her jewelry appearing on Claire's social media, her image dragged online as the unstable ex-wife of a saintly man. And now here she was, frozen, alone, exiled from the life she helped build. The lights in the mansion dimmed, laughter fading. The door remained closed. Evelyn's breath slowed. She fell to her knees in the snow, whispering, "You win." Then the world went dark. When she woke, she wasn't in heaven or hell, but in a women's shelter, the smell of antiseptic and cheap coffee in the air. A stranger's voice said softly, "You're safe now." Evelyn turned her head. An older woman sat beside her, silver hair tied neatly, eyes both kind and sharp. "I'm Margaret," she said. "You're lucky someone found you when they did." Evelyn blinked. Her lips cracked when she spoke. "I lost everything." Margaret's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe not. Sometimes losing everything is how we find out what they took." Outside, the storm had ended, but for Evelyn, something colder had begun to thaw. The first night at the shelter was silent, except for the hum of the radiator and the whisper of women crying in nearby rooms. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling like her body was still trapped in the snow outside the mansion. Her fingers ached with frostbite, her heart even worse. She didn't know what hurt more, the cold or the fact that no one came looking for her. Not her parents. Not even the friends she'd helped with rent when times were tough. Margaret visited every morning with 2 mugs of coffee. She never asked for Evelyn's story outright. She just sat there listening when Evelyn's voice finally found its way back. "He took everything," Evelyn whispered one morning. "My accounts, my house, even my name." Margaret looked at her over the steam. "Then we'll take it back, but not the way he expects." There was a steadiness to her tone that unsettled and comforted Evelyn at once. She later learned that Margaret had once been a lawyer, a good one. She'd retired after losing her only daughter to domestic abuse. The system, she said, had let power protect cruelty. Now she spent her retirement helping women rebuild, not through vengeance, but through precision. Under Margaret's guidance, Evelyn began to see what had been done to her not as heartbreak, but as a strategy, a deliberate erasure built on signatures, silence, and lies. She spent hours going through the few belongings she'd salvaged, old bank receipts, insurance papers, property deeds she'd been too naive to read. For weeks, she pieced together fragments of her life like shards of a broken mirror. One night, as snow fell again beyond the shelter windows, Margaret leaned over the table, her reading glasses reflecting the lamplight. "This isn't just divorce, Evelyn. These are forged signatures, illegal transfers. See here? They moved funds under your name 3 days before they froze your accounts." Evelyn's breath caught. "So they planned it all?" Margaret nodded. "It's financial fraud. If we can link this to his company, he's in deeper trouble than he realizes." For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something stir inside her. Not rage, not despair, but purpose. She began volunteering at the shelter to stay busy, helping other women, sorting clothes, serving food. Each face she saw, each bruised arm and trembling smile, became a reflection of her own survival. And yet, at night, she'd return to the corner table with Margaret, building her case like an architect of truth. One afternoon, while searching through an old laptop Daniel had once gifted her, she found hidden folders, emails, spreadsheets, documents marked confidential. They showed transactions between Daniel's family business and offshore accounts. One file was labeled EM, settlement draft. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. It wasn't a settlement. It was a staged agreement to paint her as mentally unstable in exchange for hush money and a restraining order. It even included psychiatric notes from a doctor she'd never met. Margaret's eyes hardened as she read. "He was building your downfall months before he locked you out." Evelyn pressed her shaking hands to her mouth. "He wanted me erased legally." "Then we won't just prove your innocence," Margaret said. "We'll prove his guilt." But going to the police wasn't enough. Daniel's family were donors, board members, and benefactors of the same institutions meant to protect people like her. Margaret knew that road would vanish in red tape. "We need the truth in public," she said. "Someone with reach and courage." Through the shelter's network, Margaret introduced Evelyn to a journalist named Noah Reyes, a quiet man with tired eyes and a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. When Evelyn told him everything, he didn't interrupt. He just recorded, asked for copies, and finally said, "If even half of this checks out, we'll burn their empire to the ground," with the truth. For months, Evelyn worked in silence. She met Noah in cafes, passed him files through encrypted emails, watched as he followed the money trail her husband thought was buried forever. At times she wavered, terrified of being humiliated again. But every doubt faded when she saw the shelter's women rebuilding their lives. They reminded her that survival wasn't shame, it was defiance. And still at night, she'd dream of the mansion, the frosted window, the laughter, Daniel's smirk as she begged in the snow. Each time, the image hurt less, not because it faded, but because she began to see herself differently, not as the woman outside the door, but as the one walking away from it. The first sign of Daniel's crumbling came quietly. A rumor online, a small headline buried in a financial section, audit inquiry at Carrington Holdings. Then another, anonymous source alleges misuse of client funds. Evelyn smiled faintly when she saw it. Margaret simply said, "The fuse is lit." Weeks later, news broke that Carrington Holdings accounts were frozen pending investigation. Claire's glamorous post vanished overnight. Daniel's parents released a public statement calling the allegations defamatory, but Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. Then one evening, while she stood outside the shelter helping carry donations, she saw it, a glossy magazine cover in a passerby's hand. Daniel and Claire, dressed for an engagement shoot, smiling beneath the headline, "Love Prevails, CEO Finds Happiness After Hard Divorce." The wind turned bitter again. Evelyn stared at the image, her jaw tightening. Then she whispered, almost gently, "Not for long." Margaret joined her, following her gaze. "Let them celebrate," she said. "They've already built their stage. Now we'll decide what plays on it." Evelyn turned toward the horizon where the city lights shimmered like cold fire. She wasn't the shivering woman outside that mansion anymore. Something stronger lived inside her now, a quiet storm gathering its power. The night before their engagement party, Noah sent a text. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow the world hears your story." Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The storm outside the window began to rise again. But this time, she wasn't afraid of it. The Carrington mansion gleamed under crystal chandeliers and strings of gold lights that night, as if wealth itself could wash away sin. Daniel stood at the top of the grand staircase, champagne in hand, dressed in a designer tuxedo that shimmered under the flashes of photographers. Beside him, Claire wore white. Not bridal white, but something close enough to provoke. Reporters murmured, guests clinked glasses, and his parents floated through the crowd like royalty, greeting senators, CEOs, and socialites who owed them favors. Every camera in the room was poised to celebrate his new beginning. Every lens pointed upward until the power shifted. At exactly 8:30, the massive LED screen behind the stage flickered. The music faltered. Conversations froze mid-laugh. Daniel frowned, whispering to a technician, but before the man could react, the screen came alive. Not with the slideshow of their love story, but with files, images, and documents. It began with an audio clip, Daniel's voice. "I told you, Claire, we have to make her look unstable. Once she signs the revised documents, we'll control everything. She won't even know what she owned." A hush rippled through the hall like an electric wave. The laughter died. Claire's face drained of color as the crowd turned toward the screen. Then came the bank transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies, property deeds, every secret laid bare, time-stamped, authenticated, undeniable. Daniel's father tried to step forward, shouting, "This is fake! Cut it off!" But the sound system carried a new voice, calm, measured, devastating. It was Noah Reyes broadcasting live. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's engagement party was meant to celebrate the merger of love and legacy. Instead, it exposes one of the largest cases of fraud and forged documentation tied to Carrington Holdings. The evidence you're seeing was provided by Evelyn Carrington, Daniel's legal wife, who was locked out of this very mansion last winter after her husband and his family conspired to steal her assets and erase her identity." Cameras turned. Gasps followed. Evelyn stood near the entrance, cloaked in a long black coat, her hair tied back, her presence quiet but commanding. She hadn't come for applause. She came for closure. Her eyes didn't seek Daniel's, only the window where she'd once begged to be let in. The frost had melted now, replaced by flashing lights and panic. Daniel's mother rushed toward the podium, screaming for security, but before she could speak, the doors opened again, this time not for guests. Federal agents in dark suits swept in with warrants. The room erupted. Guests backed away, clutching pearls and phones. Cameras pivoted toward chaos as officers read the charges aloud. Conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, identity theft, financial manipulation. Daniel tried to step forward, shouting, "I don't know what this is. This is a setup." But Noah's voice echoed from the speakers once more, calm as judgment. The signatures, the transactions, and the testimonies all confirm it. Mr. Carrington, you are under investigation for orchestrating financial and emotional abuse against your wife. The full evidence will be published tonight. Daniel's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Claire's hand trembled as agents approached her. "Daniel, say something! Tell them!" she cried. But Daniel said nothing. His face twisted between rage and fear as he saw Evelyn, calm, still, watching him as the officers read his rights. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, everything else dissolved. The music, the crowd, the scandal. Just the two of them, like the first time they met in that diner. But now his charm was gone, stripped bare, leaving only the hollow man who thought he could rewrite her existence. Evelyn took one step forward, her voice soft but clear. "You locked me out of my home," she said, just loud enough for him to hear. "But I built the door." Daniel's face fell, and for the first time, the man who'd once controlled every room looked small, drenched in the flash of police lights instead of camera bulbs. Outside, reporters swarmed as the Carringtons were escorted out in handcuffs. The once pristine snow of the driveway turned to slush under the weight of chaos. Claire screamed at photographers, covering her face, but it was too late. The world had seen her without the mask of elegance. As Evelyn stepped outside, the cold night air met her face. Not biting this time, but freeing. She stood still, breathing it in, the noise fading into the distance. Margaret approached quietly, wrapped in her wool coat, her eyes full of quiet pride. "You did it," she said. Evelyn shook her head. "No," she whispered. "We did it. Every woman they tried to bury, they forgot we were seeds." Behind her, the mansion flickered with lights and chaos. Ahead of her, dawn began to break, a thin line of gold over the horizon. She didn't smile yet. She didn't need to. There was still more to do. Justice had begun, but redemption was waiting. The world now knew the truth, but Evelyn's victory wasn't measured in headlines. It was in the silence that followed, the first peaceful silence she'd heard in years. And as she turned to leave, she glanced one last time at the frosted window, the same one where she'd once begged, broken and shivering. Her reflection stared back at her, strong and unbowed. This time, she walked away not as a victim, but as the woman who opened her own door to freedom. Months passed before the snow returned, but this winter it didn't feel like an enemy. Evelyn stood before the mansion gates, the same iron gates that once kept her out, and watched as a group of volunteers carried in boxes labeled linens, supplies, books. The brass plaque by the entrance gleamed under the pale sun. It read, "The Haven House for Women Rising." The mansion that once echoed with cruelty now hummed with laughter, soft music, and the voices of women rebuilding their lives. The chandeliers still hung above the grand halls, but their light was warmer now. The ballroom, where Daniel once flaunted his wealth, had been transformed into a communal dining space where survivors shared stories over steaming bowls of soup. The guest rooms, once places of silent judgment, were now sanctuaries filled with color and peace. Evelyn walked through the corridors slowly, her fingertips brushing against the walls she had painted years ago. The same walls she once decorated with dreams that turned to scars. But now every scar had a story, and every story had purpose. In one of the sitting rooms, Margaret sat surrounded by women filling out job applications, her glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up and smiled when she saw Evelyn. "They said the first month we'd have 5 residents. We have 32. Evelyn smiled softly. Then we'll need more beds. They shared a knowing look, one built on battles survived, on nights of doubt turned into dawns of resolve. When word of the Carrington scandal spread, the public turned swiftly. The empire Daniel's family had built on deceit collapsed piece by piece. Their assets were seized, their names stripped from charities, their influence dissolved. Daniel's sentencing had been swift and merciless. 10 years for fraud, 5 for forgery, and restitution for every stolen cent. Claire disappeared from headlines after the trial, her silence louder than apology. Evelyn didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in his downfall, but in her rebirth. She spent her days working at Haven House, organizing therapy sessions, setting up workshops for financial literacy, legal aid, and career training. Each time a woman arrived at the door with a suitcase and fear in her eyes, Evelyn saw a reflection of her past self, and each time she welcomed them in, she healed a little more. Still, there were moments when ghosts lingered. Some nights, she would stand at the same frosted window where she once begged for mercy and see her reflection in the glass. The same face but different eyes. Eyes that no longer pleaded. Eyes that witnessed and forgave herself. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, there was a knock on the door. Margaret answered and her expression changed. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "you might want to see this." On the porch stood her parents, aged, uncertain, stripped of the arrogance that once glittered around them. Her mother's voice trembled. "Evelyn, we're sorry. We didn't know what he did to you. We lost everything after the investigation. We have nowhere to go." For a moment, the air felt heavy again, like that night long ago. Her father's eyes glistened, not with love, but with shame. "We shouldn't have believed him over you." Evelyn stood silent, the memory of their cold words echoing faintly in her mind. "Be patient. You should be grateful." She looked at them now, not with hatred, but with final clarity. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said softly, "but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to open the door." Her mother's lips parted in disbelief. Evelyn's hand rested on the frame, the same way she'd once clung to it in the storm, and then she gently closed it. Not out of cruelty, but peace. Margaret's eyes met hers, approving and proud. Inside, the laughter of women drifted through the hall again. The sound didn't sting, it healed. Evelyn turned, walking through the mansion that no longer belonged to the Carringtons, but to those who needed it most. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she wandered back to the grand hall. The moonlight spilled through the high windows, painting the floor in silver. She stood before the window where it all began, the one she'd pounded on with frozen fists, the one that had once mirrored her despair. Her reflection looked back at her now, strong, calm, unbroken. She reached out, pressing her palm to the cold glass. For a moment, the wind outside howled like that night. Distant laughter carried faintly in memory, but this time Evelyn smiled. "The storm didn't destroy me," she whispered. "It revealed me." Tears shimmered but didn't fall. Behind her, the soft murmur of life, women sharing stories, children's laughter, the creak of new hope being born, filled the once empty space. She turned off the lights, leaving only the moon to watch over Haven House. As she walked down the corridor, she thought of all the doors that had been closed on women like her, and all the ones she would now open. Outside, the snow fell again, quiet and pure, covering the scars of the past. Evelyn stepped into it without fear, her breath steady, her heart light. For the first time, she didn't look back, because she wasn't the woman pounding on the door anymore. She was the one holding the key.